yourself onto Three Guys and an iPad, the only mortgage-focused podcast likely to be audited by the cyber ninjas. I'm Brian Rieger. I am the co-founder of Content Beacon, and I am not the joke writer. He'll have to be killed for that one. I'm, of course, joined by the three guys today. As always, my good friend and co-founder at Content Beacon, Rick Grant. Rick, how are you today, sir?
Doing great, Brian. Been looking forward to this show.
Oh, likewise. Yeah. We've got a good one here. We have a really good one, and a happy belated birthday to you, Mr. Grant.
Thank you. Thank you very kindly. I'm officially old now.
Only if you admit it. Only if you admit it, Rick. Normally, this is where I introduce our third guy, Kevin Breeland, but he's not able to be with us today. He'll be back with us next week. We've got a real special panel here, and before I jump in and introduce him, this is the point where I make the shameless plug for Content Beacon, the only B2B content marketing agency serving the mortgage industry. If you'd like to see yourself or another guest on the show, or if you've got some topics for us, just email us. It should be in the show notes. Brian at contentbeacon.com, Rick at contentbeacon.com. With that, today's show is going to be something you may not see too many other places. We're going to do a mergers and acquisitions episode. That alone is not so unique, but we're going to do it from the title side, settlement services, and we're going to jump ahead to after the ink on the contract is dry. So you've bought yourself another title agency. What now? So we're going to talk about integration, security, trying to bring office cultures together. We will be doing another M&A episode not too long from now. In terms of valuation, we'll get you more info. But for today, let's just get into the guests here. We got a lot of good stuff to talk about. Our first special guest is a friend of the show. In fact, we thought he had unfriended us, haven't seen him in a while. He's the SVP at Fidelity National Financial. He's worked with just about every title agent in the industry over the past few decades. Chuck Cain, welcome back.
Thank you, Brian. Happy to be here.
Awesome. And our next guest you probably recognize as well, although it is his first, hopefully not the last, but the first time on the show. He's the CEO of AMD Enterprises. You may know him a little better as the CEO of the Florida Agency Network. He actually owns and runs dozens of businesses in the industry. If we went through his full bio, we might not be able to get into the content for the show, but we're really excited to have from near the Tampa area in Florida, Aaron Davis. Aaron, welcome.
Thank you, Brian, for having me. Look forward to talking with you guys.
And I'll mention also, Aaron does offer consulting services in terms of M&A activity before and after. And Chuck Cain is just a de facto consultant to everyone on everything. If you know Chuck, you know he's got some wisdom. And I don't mean that in a sarcastic manner. Chuck is definitely a guy who's seen it all. So we've also, but I don't want to sell short our next two guests. We've got four great folks today. Our third guest has been around the industry about as long as Aaron and Chuck, really. He started with RamQuest years ago. He's currently the president and co-founder of a company called anna.ai. If you haven't yet heard of Alana, you will soon if you're a title agent. It's some of the very first and some of the very best AI in the industry. And if you're an agent and you're looking to eliminate your staffing needs and challenges, Alana's going to take care of that for you. So, Hoyt, little free plug there. From McKinney, Texas today, welcome, Hoyt Mann.
Thank you, Brian. Yeah, great to be here with this group of fine gentlemen.
Well, and we're excited to have you here. Our last guest is from Premier One. He's the VP of Managed Services. He's also been in the industry quite some time. His experience comes on the IT consulting, security, implementation, integrations, and I'm sure there's more there too. But please give a welcome to our guest, Kevin Nincehelser. And Kevin, you're in Topeka today, correct?
Yeah, that's right. And thanks for having me, Brian.
We're excited to have you, Kevin. We got a great group here, and as you can see, we've got all the bases covered. I think, the starting point for this show is really, so you bought yourself another title agency or another few offices. So let's start right there. Let's take the scenario of a title agent or the owner of an agency or a settlement services company. You've just made the acquisition of maybe an established multi-office group of agents. Maybe it's in a new market, to throw in another wrinkle. You've done your due diligence on the valuation. You know what kind of production system you're inheriting here. So now you've got a bunch of new offices. Where do you start? Chuck or Aaron, you want to get us started, and then we'll hit everybody on this one?
Well, is the option of stop pay on the check? Is that an option on what to do first?
It is. Thank you, everybody. That's it.
Perfect.
Yeah.
That's a wrap.
Oh, well, I'll take a stab at it. Let's see. If I go back in time, I think I've had about 12 to 15 acquisitions over the course of the last 10 years or so. And oddly enough, I've had 3 sales. So I've got a pretty unique stance on this. But, first and foremost, I think the very first thing that you do is it's the meet and greet, right? So normally it's a surprise to the staff, so that's usually the first thing is you have to have this great, moment. And believe me, I've done it the wrong way and the right way. So I think the right way is you try to get everyone, face to face as you can and really message it. A lot of folks, especially in acquisition of a smaller agency, they're scared of big corporate. Like, oh my gosh, everything's going to change. And so, a big piece of that first, that first meeting is kind of, establishing the groundwork, especially if you're another agent, another agent making an acquisition. It's, hey, we're just like you, we're just larger, but, you kind of sell the company culture and, sell the things that, yes, there's going to be some changes, but, you'll probably come to like all the things that you see change, especially if you've got, better health insurance benefits or, more benefits and more value that they're going to see, from an employee standpoint.
Chuck, you've seen more than a few of these transactions yourself. You've been a part of them back in the day when you ran agencies yourself. Where do you start?
Well, I think, and just as Aaron outlines, part of it is, where did you start before you did the acquisition? And so, that due diligence, what exactly are you getting into? I think that's a very, very important thing because obviously if you're acquiring a family business, that's very different than a more corporate structure. So you've got to deal with those types of topics and think about that obviously in advance and say, Aaron's done it more times than maybe anybody in the country. And building on what he was talking about, I think that, assimilating culture, if you're the acquiring company, what is the culture of your company? And how do you convey that culture to the people who are coming on board? Because their culture may have been similar or it may have been dramatically different. And I think that, corporate culture, what's the old Peter Drucker line that culture eats strategy for breakfast, that if you start at that point, just as Aaron outlines, because you're meeting with a lot of people who are concerned, to say the least, and to pose the question like, well, what are your problems? You've just joined our company. So what are your problems? What have your problems been? And I think, be brutally honest. In an acquisition, quite often the management team comes over. That's usually desirable because the management team usually has some role in the sales and marketing and in the business base. But there are employees who may be hesitant in a public forum to say, well, my major problem is this guy who runs the place, and thank God you're here. And I think that, to have that sort of public meeting, I think to have sort of one-on-ones with the employees. So that's like, what are your problems? We're here to solve your problems. We're not here to create more problems for you. I think what Aaron has done and a lot of other agencies that have done acquisitions recently, is this model of, well, we're part of a large organization, which brings economies of scale, brings better benefits, things like that. But in your county, how things work. And so we're going to keep the name. We're going to keep that sort of down-home feeling about that everything or that everybody has enjoyed your realty base, your builder base, your lender base. We aren't going to upset that apple cart. At least until such time as we feel we have to, because things aren't working out. That's always, to my mind, after an acquisition. If it's well done, if it's smoothly done, you can start from a good position. But quite often it's that 9 months to a year later when the acquired entity isn't doing what it should be doing. And that's when you have to really sort of step in, and you have to deal with whatever issues you're faced with, whether they are personnel, HR issues, simply the business model that they may have in their respective marketplace. So it's an ongoing process, as I'm sure Aaron can painfully tell you. Aaron's only like 23 years old. He looks that much older because he's gone through this so many times. To that end, it is a process that goes on for some time. And quite often in acquisitions that I have seen, it's sometimes 2 or 3 years later before the dust has settled enough that you really understand what has been acquired, what is functioning, what is not functioning, and to be able to make those adjustments. But I think, incorporating people into your culture and making them feel that they are part of something and that they are empowered to speak to you about the problems that they have had up till then, and to have staff and staff meet. That is something that I always found to be very helpful, is that you have all the settlement or escrow officers. You buy a bunch of pizzas and you bring in people from 3 or 4 offices for lunch and let them hash out their issues, because they know what their issues are. Mm-hmm. And don't even sit in the meeting sometimes. Just ask them to come back to you as to what happened in that meeting, because it may be that acquired company, that they have problems they never even thought about, and certainly solutions that may have been arrived at by your other branch operations, perhaps months or years before, and they can work it out, and that makes everyone feel more part of a team, and it's a more inclusive way to move forward. Because I've been part of an agency acquired by an underwriter. That's a very different sort of experience than it is being acquired by another agency. Because if you're acquired by an underwriter, in most cases, you're being acquired by a publicly traded company. Or if it's privately traded, it's a corporate structure. 2 very different sort of experiences. But I think that culture build is so critical, both in the onset and then in the year or 2 to come, when you begin to see where the rocks in the road are.
Yeah. And Chuck, I'll add something there, because you brought up a great point. The acquisition of a family-run or an owner-operator business versus one that's maybe slightly larger, that has more of a corporate, I'm going to call it a corporate culture. Maybe owner's a little more absentee. So if it's a small agent, so maybe it's a small agency, 10, 20 staff, and the owner is there working side by side a lot of the folks, and they're always used to being able to go to Chuck with issues and being accessible, and all of a sudden there's a culture shift, and they're like, wow, well, he's not here anymore. I used to go to him for issues or problems or questions, and now I have to now I got to get to know the new people. So there's a little bit of that versus the owner, the corporate model, where the owner is more of an investor in his company. He's less hands-on. Maybe he's just more focused on the sales side and less on the operations. Those tend to be a little more easy to kind of fold into a model versus the other one, because there could have been a lot of hand-holding. I mean, I've certainly seen loans on the books. Like I loaned Sally the processor $5,000 2 years ago, and next thing you know, there's a culture of that being able to come and ask the boss for a loan. You kind of get away from a lot of those things as you grow and scale.
Well, and I want to latch on to something, Aaron, you alluded to this, and Chuck, you did earlier, and I'm going to invite the entire roundtable to jump in, Hoyt and Kevin, even Rick, or, Chuck or Aaron, if you want to come back to it. So I'm hearing that it's really important to start with the people, start by addressing the cultures, just get the personalities to mesh and get your leadership in order and whatnot. So we hear so often about challenges, and I'm asking at the high level, but we can certainly drill down too. So where in this process I don't want to make it a checklist. I imagine you're doing almost everything simultaneously, but where in the process does operations, differences in operations, and then specifically tech, systems, security, that kind of thing, where on the checklist is this? Who's taking care of that? When's it get started? And I'll toss that up to the panel.
Yeah, so I might throw in there just real quick and say that don't hesitate to use your IT provider even in the due diligence process. I think sometimes these deals get inked without thinking about what are the costs going to be around the tech side. And the sooner you can, if you have a trusted IT partner who can help you evaluate the systems that are currently in place, they can kind of do that behind the scenes and give you a decent overview and let you know what you're dealing with from a technical perspective. You know, at the end of the day, a lot of the data that is being acquired is going to involve those IT systems, and so you have to know that you're on solid ground there going into it, or if not, you have to have a plan for doing that.
Yeah, great point. Great point.
Yeah, I'll add here that, you know, Aaron and I had a conversation about, you know, when two companies come together and you're looking at their production system, it's almost, again, you know, as Kevin mentioned, part of the due diligence. I mean, that could definitely be a decision point as far as you're merging these two agencies together. It could either be a plus or minus in the deal. And when you see two systems that you know will mesh well together, then, you know, then that's definitely a plus. And, you know, as you're merging companies together, economies of scale start to creep in, you know, and I'm sure Kevin can mention, you know, kind of talk to that point as far as from the IT perspective. Now you're meshing two systems together, maybe two independent environments that come together as one. But, you know, from the Alana perspective, you know, we're all about the conversations. We're all about, you know, how does the communications now outside of the organization happen? And that's where, you know, some of the biggest, your biggest realtors are coming to you bringing business. You want to communicate with them in a way, effectively communicate with them that, hey, look, business is going to continue as usual, if not, you know, elevated. And, you know, hopefully Alana's part of that conversation.
Let me latch onto that, Hoyt, actually. And Kevin, I think same question for you, although again, I invite everybody to jump in. How do you address that? You've got multiple offices now. They have different ways of handling customer service. They may have different standards, different deadlines, turn times, ways of going about it. Similarly, you might have two different systems of cybersecurity, or one or none. You might have, you know, and not even the, you know, whether you're using a Soft Pro or a Resware, but, you know, on the where and how do you start identifying the divide, and how do you start to address that? And I'll make that open to everybody.
I think it's identified, you know, it's pre-purchase. You know, I think you really have to identify, you know, my client base, what level of communication are they accustomed to? And, you know, anytime there's an acquisition, there's automatic, you know, the clients are always like, wait, I was used to, you know, Chuck running the company, and now you're telling me that Aaron is, what's going to change for me? So I think, you know, most importantly is establishing what that foundation looks like and adding to it immediately. You know, so like Hoyt said, like adding that more communication. You know, if you walk in and they were used to getting a phone call every Friday with an update on all of their files, you know, if it's a realtor that has volume and that's what their expectation was, and then all of a sudden your new system does not allow for that, they're going to be, you know, disappointed. And there's always someone waiting in the wings, you know, looking for that opportunity to go win their business. So I think you have to walk in with, you know, meeting the client expectation on the communication, but more than that, you better exceed it. You know, I think they want to see value of the acquiring company, that they are bringing in, you know, they're bringing in more firepower than what was previously here.
And I'll just add too, and especially going back to Kevin's early comments, you know, to involve your IT people in the acquisition from the beginning for the due diligence. And I know Aaron does that because he's got some high-powered people who work for him, not just people who are outside providers. You know, cybersecurity what is their cybersecurity policy? Do they have a cybersecurity policy? I spoke with a friend who over Memorial Day had trouble buying gasoline in South Carolina because of the Colonial Pipeline shutdown. And I was out this morning buying a side of beef because apparently we're going to have that problem too for cybersecurity. But what is it that the company that you're acquiring has? What do they have in the way of privacy? That will be the P word here in the upcoming years, because we see more and more states coming forward with privacy requirements. And as we know, if you're working with lenders who work in a variety of states, and let's say they work in little places, little markets like California, New York, Texas is talking about a privacy law. Even here in Ohio, where usually we argue about corn futures, is talking about an updated privacy law. What are those requirements? Because if a lender works in that market, the lender is going to have a privacy requirement for data that they submit to the title agent and their consumer data that is going to have to hit that high standard. So whatever California requires, they're not going to say, oh, well, you're in Florida, we don't have to worry about that. Oh, yeah, because we only have one standard. So I think that, going into it, I think you want to have your IT, your cybersecurity, and privacy. Again, talking about data in transit. If you're on one software system and you're going to move into the acquired company's software system, that cybersecurity, that privacy, as you're moving those things, because we have seen where occasionally there's a hack in the midst of the transit. That's a problem. And of course, what has been the major problem for the title industry long before COVID, wire fraud. What was their policy? I know of one title agent who called me about doing an acquisition. He said, yeah, I'm a little concerned because the company that we're looking to acquire, they really only reconcile their accounts twice a month. And it's like, well, I think you better tell them to reconcile daily and maybe get someone like Rhino or another system in there to put that in place before you decide to acquire them, because you may have acquired them in the midst of a wire fraud because they don't know.
Yeah. I will add too, if the acquiring company, this is something we went down this road, Chuck, you remember the 2015 TRID days, and everyone's, scared to death of, CFPB coming to shut us down. So a lot of us went out and obtained our SOC 1, our SOC 2, and all these higher level of certifications. So now we've maintained those SOCs for years now. And so having that SOC 1 Type 2 says that my processes are the same in every office, every location. So having a kind of a foundational, a workflow, if you will, of how every operation, every office you acquire is now going to act, it turns out to be pretty helpful. It gives you a playbook as to how to run this new agency.
Well, I'll tell you, a couple of you guys alluded to this over the course of the last answer. I want to kind of drill down on this a little bit. We talked a lot about the pre-acquisition planning. We talked a lot about, this is something you should look at before you sign the contract. But how well, in your experiences, your collective experience, how well do most owners plan the post-acquisition the integration in your experience, or what do they tend to miss or misjudge, or what are some of the things folks just don't account for in their due diligence and their pre-acquisition eval?
I could speak on the first couple of acquisitions. There was none, and we learned from the sins of our past. So you said, yay, everyone's here and they're going to love it here, so let's just do business as usual. And then you find out the hard way. With us, anytime that there's an acquisition, we've got there's about a 10-person team on our side who is taking care of all the pieces of the puzzle. That team continues to run 90 to 180 days post acquisition as well. So it's really wrapping up the post close. What often people miss is the accounting side of an acquisition, winding down of escrow account, bleeding out old account. I mean, and look, there's certain expectations you've got to talk about those, prior to transaction. Whose responsibility is this? Who's going to pay for it? Is it the new acquirer, or is it the old owner's issue? Sometimes they say, well, look, you're buying my entire company, including my accounting staff. I won't have the bandwidth to be able to handle winding down multiple escrow accounts. So all of a sudden it becomes, it goes on the shoulders of the acquirer. So you have to delegate staff and time, and how long is that going to take? And, when, like Chuck said, how long has, this gone without reconciliation, or have they ever escheated funds to the state? Those type of things, ideally you're only dealing with old accounting issues for 12 months, but I've seen it go much, much longer.
And I'll just add, and what Aaron said is the experience I've had with so many other people when we did an acquisition, and to think of it sort of like in military terms. Well, we had Operation Overlord and we landed on the Normandy beaches, but we didn't have D-Day +6 figured out, or D-Day +12, or D-Day +30, or D-Day +180. And you have to figure out, it's like, well, it's not just taking the Normandy beaches, now what? And and again, saturation bombing in advance helps. But that sort of circumstance, to build that out, that's what has been my experience too. But yeah, as Aaron said, you only have to run into these once or twice, and it's like, we got to think a little bit longer term as to how this is going to work, where we're going to be 3, 6, 12, 18 months from now, as to how this moves forward. And of course, when it's well done, it's well done. But I certainly know of acquisitions where, once those non-competes have expired, everybody quits. And it's like, so what happens if that happens? Can we put staff in there and preserve our acquisition? Because otherwise what we've acquired is office leases and computer equipment.
Yeah, exactly. And that, say you're making an acquisition that has REO accounts or builder accounts. Those are longer, lead times versus a purchase acquisition or a refi shop that, everything in the pipeline is going to close out in 30 days, give or take. So now you only have to keep those old files active on the old system for a certain period of time before you can transition everyone over to a new closing production system. But those builder files and REO, shoot, you could be sitting on curative REO files for 6 months or greater. So you've really got to account for all of that in the acquisition process and in your timelines and math.
That's something, Brian, I'm really interested in is the technology side. So on the mortgage side, where I normally play, we see mergers and acquisitions, and a lot of times they'll do kind of, I think what you said earlier, Chuck, where they'll just leave the operation in place, let it keep operating the way it has been, because there's some pluses there. So it's got a different LOS, it's got a different point of sale, it's got all this stuff, and it doesn't matter as much there. But it seems like in the title side, if they're on different production systems, it's going to be hard to monitor them. There's going to be problems. How important is it on this side of the business that you unify the tech stacks, or is it important at all?
That's a great point. As far as, the tech stack is super important. As far as, there's more advanced systems that can handle, let's just say workflows, for instance, or, more advanced type processing. And then there's other systems that are just not specifically designed to do some of these type functions. And so from our perspective, our software is plugging into some of the more advanced solutions on the marketplace. And so that's a big deal. If that's part of, the merger, that merger plan, it's a big deal. I'm gonna pass it over to Kevin. I think Kevin might be able to talk to some of that as well.
Yeah, thanks. So, we always look for opportunities where the production software is going to stay the same. So if you do find an acquisition where they're on the same production software as your company, there's definitely value to that. But we call it technical debt. When you have a lot of legacy data that you're acquiring into, you have to go in with a plan for how you're going to absorb that. So if you're going to keep using your production software and you're going to move those users to yours, that doesn't mean the other data goes away, right? So you're still paying for the licenses or the storage or whatever. And so coming in with a plan for how you're going to absorb that data, I think is critical. Whether you're going to, spin up your own instance of it, or you're going to copy the database and use some third-party integration, just know how you're going to retain the value of that data, and also know what the cost is going to be to retaining it. That has to go into your planning. I see oftentimes people want to keep it the same, keep things the same, so there's not much disruption or interruption. But there are always going to be things that you don't want to keep the same. And from the outset, you have to be looking at, are there lurking security gaps that maybe were not disclosed because they were not known? And when you come into this new company, they haven't been following your processes or your policies and procedures. Don't assume they've been following their own policies and procedures. And so, we like to really go in and evaluate that right off the bat, and flip the switch on a few security measures that can go a long way in keeping that company, which is now your company, safe moving forward.
So one follow-up on that, Chuck and Aaron, now, how do you manage, because there's going to be winners and losers when the platform changes. How do you manage your people through that process?
Well, when Kevin was speaking, it did dawn on me too, that a lot of the acquiring companies operate on centralized services models. So that be mortgage, be title, whatever the company is, they have probably figured out a way to structure for efficiency. So they centralize order entry, post-closing, processing, different parts of the file. And when you have these central teams, imagine, 80% of them working on, title production system A, and now you just acquired somebody else, and now I've got to log into 2 different systems to do work. So now I've got to allocate more people over here to this side than what's over here. Ultimately, my accounting is all centralized. So now I'm having to do 2 sets of roll-up, P&Ls, balance sheets, all the things that give me a snapshot into, my profitability. So I think it is important over time to integrate those systems together the best you can, or allowing the stronger system to, ultimately take over. And then it's the management of, people don't like change in general. I found that out the hard way and decided to change my entire operating system back in June of 2015, pre-TRID. So my staff loved me for that. I still get death threats from some of them. But that's where kind of what Hoyt was alluding to is that's where that forward-facing consumer technology helps a lot. With the communication, the tech continues just to roll out with AI, and what we're able to do from a database level to blend blend tools, blend systems, blend reporting, using business analytics tools as well to kind of overlay multiple databases.
Well, yeah, and Rick, to your point and to what Aaron was asking about, you have to have change champions. You have to have people who are there who understand and buy in, but buy in not just like, oh yeah, okay. They really have to understand what's trying to be accomplished. And if there is pushback, it's like, was the pushback valid? Or is the pushback invalid? Is it just like, well, I don't want to do it that way? It's like, well, tough, because here is a process. And once you learn this new process, you're going to find your life's a lot easier. But, I think, and Rick, to your point, about the mortgage industry, and I'll go back to one of the early Three Guys webcasts with the Honorable Joe Murin. And as Joe said, whenever you see a headline about the mortgage industry or a mortgage company spending a tremendous amount of money on technology, 90% of that's about sales. and rarely about operations. And having been at a number of MBA risk assessment and quality assurance conferences, you meet those people who are at the back end of mortgage production, and they spend a great deal of their time slogging their way through swamps that are quite often created by mergers and acquisitions of other companies. In title and settlement, our operations productivity is our sales and marketing. If you can't get that package out the door and delivered to a lender the next business day, you're not getting another order. If you can't get that productivity through your operations done so that the real estate professional, the loan officer, whoever it is, if they don't get their check, you're out of business. So it is different for us in that, yes, in lending, it's about the consumer facing, and of course, many lenders do a tremendous amount in terms of investment of their productivity. So I'm not trying to disparage, the industry, but it is not uncommon, and when we see it, especially with bank mergers, when you have regulated institutions, I can't even imagine what a painful experience that is. But who we are in title and settlement, our operations, it's our marketing. How quickly can we turn things around? How quickly can we get a title order placed, get that search accomplished, the examination, all the things that go through our process, and then get that package out the door accurately to a lender? That's who we are, because title insurance, if a settlement provider is involved in the title insurance industry, in most states, it's the same thing. It's the same policy. It quite often is the same price. It's like, well, title insurance, we don't sell on title insurance. We sell on our operational productivity.
Yeah, and I'll kind of add to that, Rick. So in the past, when you would acquire another title company, you're just looking at what's their blend, cash deals, purchase, refinance, investor business, et cetera. Now you have to add in e-closing, because that requires different trained staff oftentimes in doing remote online notarizations or e-closing. So now all of a sudden I'm acquiring a refinance title company that 80% of their business is e-closing, and I'm in a state that doesn't do that yet. So now I've got to figure out this new trick, and I mean, it's something to kind of add to the checklist.
And I'll just add one thing about that, because the variety of closing experience. Brad Edmonds been talking about the variety of realty experience for the last couple of years, about how realty, if you want to deal completely online with a company like Redfin, you may never see a real estate agent and buy a house. We are now faced with that in our industry, and COVID has just accelerated that, because, okay, a transaction comes in, and say, Aaron and I have been doing this for a few years. 10 years ago, it's like, okay, well, here's how we do it, because we do it this way every time. We make the widget the same way. Now, depending on who the lender is, depending on what the consumer wants, depending on what the real estate professional wants, it's like, okay, is this a traditional closing? Is it a hybrid? Or we have some paper? We have some electronic documents? Is it all an e-closing? Is it all electronic? Is it a RON closing? Is that what the consumer and, of course, the lender, and quite often the loan officer, who only wants to make it easier for their customer and may not know what goes on in regard to a RON transaction? That's a challenge for our industry, because, again, going back 10 years ago, maybe fewer years ago, a staff that worked, in Tampa or Cincinnati, or, well, let's say Cleveland. There's a good choice, because Cleveland does escrow closings like East Coast, West Coast. There was one way of doing things. That isn't the case anymore. Every transaction that comes in, there's to be an analysis about, okay, how are we going to do this? And what do we have in our systems? And what trained staff do we want to have? A RON team, because we have so many of them, and the rest of the team maybe isn't quite up to it for a variety of reasons. It presents a lot of challenges that 4 or 5 years ago we really didn't have to face.
I love that concept of the experience, that closing experience, because that's where you have the realtors that are these young guns coming up, and they're doing business just a little bit different than their predecessors. And so with business, moving to mobile, that experience, texting is now more popular than ever. That method of communication is key. And, from a merger perspective, if you're merging into a company that's capable of handling these type of experiences, that's where a lot of efficiencies can be gained. And if you're holding on to staff doing business one way and staff doing business a different way, you're not really gaining the efficiencies through a merger. You just have two independently operating companies. But as you elevate your experience, elevate your technology, you really can have that staff get excited about a merger because these value adds that are coming to play, which are now doing business in a way of, you used to be in the end of the month, everybody is just absolutely going nuts because phones are ringing off the hook and emails are coming in and closings are trying to happen. But when you have technology that's helping that process along and is able to, instead of deferring work, actually solving questions without human intervention, that we're big fans of AI here. And so it's all about those conversations happening without involving humans and solving those questions that are coming in that otherwise can take 15 minutes of phone call. So we're trying to help solve those questions, keep elevating that experience in a way that that gives title companies a better reputation in the marketplace of delivering a great experience.
All right, I'm going to take a little bit of a left turn with you guys here, and I'll note this is one of the very few three guys in an iPad episodes that doesn't have at least 3 or 4 attorneys involved. We've just got Chuck really here today, but I think you've all got some experience in terms of you don't have to be a lawyer to know what kind of challenges you can have with compliance. So I want to ask you guys a little bit, and maybe Chuck, if you want to take the lead on this one, but everyone's welcome. What kinds of compliance? Obviously, there's a lot of compliance, a lot of a lot of legal work involved before the acquisition is made, but especially where you're going to be doing business, say in a new district, a new market across state lines or even county lines or whatever. Talk to me a little bit about the kinds of compliance and maybe regulatory concerns that a new owner or an owner who's made the acquisition should be thinking about after, as I've said, the contract is signed.
Well, as the lawyer in the panel, and of course I have the constitutional right to remain silent, but not the ability, I think that we've covered a lot of it. I mean, the cybersecurity, all those types of compliance issues, we've already talked about a lot of that. But certainly, and Aaron's experienced this, and and we see it in a lot of the acquisitions that are going on currently. And I'll just say, I mean, I think this is a great webcast, because M&A in the title industry, anybody who thinks it's not active, I guess, doesn't get the papers, so to speak, or get their news online. I'm sorry, it's my age. But I think that when you're going into another jurisdiction, you certainly need to have compliance counsel to see, if you're going to go into another state, in Ohio, if you're going to acquire a title agency in Michigan. Michigan's got a whole bunch of different employment laws than Ohio does. And so you need to have someone who can understand the business concept in terms of compliance as to what needs to be done in a given jurisdiction, especially in regard to HR issues. That's a big topic because, God forbid you're looking to acquire a title agency in California, because in California, if you have an employee who murders a co-employee, but you don't have a smoking gun or have it on video, it's about a 6-month process to fire. So, when you go into different jurisdictions, if it's employment by will, if it's, an easy state, if it's similar in terms of laws and jurisdiction, but, and their marketing, how they've been marketing. Are they marketing through social media? You go into particular states, it's like, well, we can't really market that way. And some of the attorney states are like that too. It's like, well, okay, we're in South Carolina. Well, South Carolina Supreme Court has concerns about how far we can go on social media marketing because we are attorneys marketing ourselves as versus a lay title corporation. So, yeah, I think you have to look at all those elements and you need counsel, and sometimes it may require local counsel in that state, particularly if you're going into a state where you have no previous experience, but you know enough to realize it's different as to how things work. And of course, the processes in the various states. North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia. Gee, it seems to make a lot of sense. Well, why wouldn't you just be in Atlanta and Columbia and Charlotte? Well, that's because it works 3 different ways as to title and settlement. And so you have to structure your company completely differently in each of those states to have the highest form of efficiency. So there is a lot, certainly in terms of compliance, but again, the cybersecurity and privacy, I think we hit on that. That's probably the top item, I think. But yeah, then you have to drill into all the HR concerns, the banking law concerns, the good funds concerns, to be sure that you're meeting all the requirements of any new jurisdiction you move into.
Yeah, I'll give you one real world example on the compliance from county to county. So this is literally from Hillsborough County to Pasco County. So Hillsborough being where Tampa is, Pasco being a high growth area. If anyone acquires a title company in Pasco County, Florida, it's very important that they know that the non-ad valorem taxes are prorated, not on a calendar year, January to December 31. It is from 10/1 to 9/30. So anyone who acquires from outside or does business there unknowingly has been prorating taxes the wrong way their entire career. So you kind of do need to get granular with it, because otherwise you're going to walk in, think you know it all, and then cost yourself a lot of money, over time by prorating taxes incorrectly.
And I'll just add, having run a title agency in Cincinnati, you work in a tri-state region, and taxes literally are prorated 7 different ways, depending what state and what county you're in. And in some cases in Indiana, they're not prorated at all. So, and Kentucky, you have city and county taxes that prorate differently because of fiscal year versus calendar year. So yeah, that proration of taxes is a swamp in which armies whole have sunk.
Well, so I guess the bottom line is, don't let the independent counsel go quite that quickly after the contract gets signed, I guess. And, I do want to ask briefly, we're coming to the end here, but I'm going to throw this out to the panel. And I know hack is becoming an outdated word, but I'd love to hear if we've got any practical hacks for integration. We've heard the challenges between the push-pull of keeping your staff happy and comfortable and not just imposing massive changes at once versus improving productivity, efficiency, and whatnot. So if you guys have any, and I don't care if it could be security, Kevin, or it could be customer service, Hoyt, or whoever, but anyone have any practical hacks for our viewers, once you're getting into that integration process?
I always recommend taking a quick look at is if the company being acquired is using Microsoft 365, then check out their Microsoft 365 security score. There's no cost to this. It's just a place within Microsoft 365 you can go. And what Microsoft has done is they've provided a one-stop shop for you to be able to see, are they at a 20% or an 80%, or are they at like a 3% and we shouldn't even touch this. It's just a one quick glance that can tell you a lot about the overall security position of the company, and also gives you a really quick checklist for the things that you're going to need to knock out really quick as you get started.
So in a traditional title agency, they're doing, 100 closings a month, and there's, multiple closers that are getting done on a Friday, and it's 5 o'clock. And then all of a sudden they realize, oh my gosh, I've got to post-close all of this stuff. Now I got to fund, I got to do all this other stuff. So if you work in a centralized model where you have a department doing all of those post-closing functions, when you go in and have that initial meeting with all the staff and go, hey, by the way, closers, you're not going to have to stay here till midnight, scanning files and shipping them to lenders and doing all these other things. This department does it for you. I mean, that alone sometimes has, every closer just simultaneously, singing in praise.
Well, on that note, I've got one last question for the panel here. And again, it's a toss-up, but in your experience, or even if you haven't experienced it, from what you've seen out there in the industry, we've all been in this space for some time now. What do the mergers or acquisitions in the title industry, especially the ones that have the best long-term success, what do they all have in common?
I'll say it's similar cultures. The ones that when you buy a well-respected company that has been run well, and you do your due diligence and find out that the owner or the staff is just very in tune to what's going on in the industry, and they all feel like you, it usually lands up in a really good place.
I'll just add to that. Absolutely. It's where you win going in. It's where you win coming out. Is on the culture, because you'll keep your staff, you'll be able to make the changes because people will trust you. They'll internally trust what you're doing because they know who you are and what you stand for. And I think that is absolutely the key element to success of every one of these acquisitions. And if there is not that culture commonality, or if there's a culture clash, it will fail. And we've seen those in other, corporate structures, airline mergers where, the two guys who run the airlines hate each other's guts, and they make announcements in respective cities about the acquisition and make negative comments about the other company. But, they're not as bad as they used to be. And so we think this is going to work out. And guess what? It does not. It just uniformly does not. And so, I completely agree. It's culture, because whatever you do should flow from your culture. And as long as people buy into the culture, and you've got a good culture for your company, you'll be successful.
And I might just add to that too. You'll figure out real quick if there's someone there who doesn't buy into that. Do not wait. Do not drag your feet in making a change there, because they might take your best clients with you.
Wow, great point. Great point. Well, we've really had a wealth of information out there today. It is getting to be that time again. Hopefully you guys will be willing to come back and maybe touch base on this topic. Of course, M&A activity is really blowing up out there, not just on the mortgage side, on the title side. So with that, I'd like to thank our special guest, Mr. Chuck Cain, Aaron Davis, Hoyt Mann, Kevin Nincehelser, and as always, my friend Rick Grant. We appreciate you guys being there. We're going to include your contact information and websites in our show notes. And of course, to all of you out there, if you've got questions for these gentlemen, there's a lot, we could do this for 6 hours probably. But if you've got some questions, or if you just want to kind of reach out and find out more about what they do, please just check out the show notes and they'll have their information there. And some of you already know this, some don't, but we record the show on an old 2nd generation iPad, and it kind of explains the short nature of the show. I did manage to get an iOS update this week, though. We're up to 3rd generation, and as far as I could tell, the battery capacity wasn't part of it. So maybe next time. Mr. Grant, take us home.